Hello and welcome to the final section of day one of this course. In this section we will continue with looking at lesson planning. This will continue tomorrow in day two of the course, but in here we'll be talking about stages of an online lesson. We'll be looking at the online learning tools for each stage, and we'll be looking at alternative lesson staging in an online class. Just to begin with, as a little warmer into this final section and to break from looking at the screen, I'd like you to go to a tool called Mentimeter. It's a good surveying tool for presentations. Go to www.menti.com and then ask for this code and just follow the instructions on the screen. And using Mentimeter we can see what your opinion is on important stages for a language lesson, and we can see that you think the presentation is very important, the production and the practice, with the other sections coming lower down. Now of course, presentation, practice, production, for quite a lot of language teacher training courses, this is the common way that a teaching lesson is delivered, that we are trained to deliver. And so just to introduce the tools that you could use, we'll be using this staging structure. So looking at presentation, of course you'll be brainstorming, you'll be looking at the prior knowledge of the students, you will give some language instruction, and you will model and scaffold the target language. To do these things, there are a few tools you could use. I'm just going to share them in this section. I'll talk about them briefly, but the idea is that for all of these, you research it, you trial it, and you share with your colleagues to see which ones you prefer best. So Padlet, this is a nice platform which many teachers it's expanded a lot. It originally was a pinboard just for sharing images and videos, but now it's expanded to a place where students can actually post their own images, so it can become a discussion board and even a video board you can screencast on there. Google Classroom, of course, very well funded website where pretty much it's a learning management system which can run every part of a course, the content, the assessment that you need. Newsella, a good website for topical things, so you can it's quite American based, but it can get a lot of common news stories, but it will grade the stories for different levels of language, and so anything that's relevant in the news or relevant to what you will be delivering in the class, you could find there. Insert Learning, this is where you would get a text and use the Insert Learning website to throw in questions at key points of the text, so build students' confidence in reading language. Mentimeter we just used, a great presentation software. Canva I've used several times during this presentation, last couple of sections, to create posters, to create engaging images. It's very, very easy to use, and I find all the templates there very useful. Zoom, we're using it for this presentation as a meeting room. Screencast, you can use this to record your own videos with your own narration using a PowerPoint. You can prepare lessons in advance to use in the class, set as homework. YouTube, where you would put your videos, create your own YouTube channel. I've done a PD on this, which I can share on the website for you to watch. Edpuzzle, this is where a collection of videos from YouTube, National Geographic, different places that have video sharing. And again, like Insert Learning, you would throw in key questions at key parts of the video. So it's a bit more it's a bit more visual than just reading. They actually get to listen as well. And Flipgrid, a great website that I'm starting to become more familiar with, which is focused on flipped classrooms. So setting videos, setting learning in advance of the classroom, creating a discussion a bit like Padlet earlier, where students can post their own videos and reflect on what they've done, and you actually use the classroom time to produce the language in more depth, more freely, to look at student concerns and build fluency that way. Practice. This is where you would use the language in a fixed activity. They are student-centered materials. We're trying to build students' confidence of using the language in this section. Many people would use common ones here. Google Docs, you can create your own, a bit like Google Classroom, but you would use a Google Doc for a shared document that students can show and they can see other students working. They need to build confidence so that they're not quite yet ready to use the language individually, so they would use a Google Doc where they can share with the other students. Quizzes, Quizlet, Kahoot, these are all common question-based websites where they build a competitive edge between students to see how they're doing on the language at that stage of the learning, how confident they are at various vocab points, at various grammar points. Production, the final stage of the lesson, often not prepared enough, not considered as important, but it's absolutely crucial for language, for fluency, that people make a good activity that allows them to apply the learning in a free way. It assesses the learning, it gives the students a chance to reflect on how well they're doing, to see how their peers are doing. Other websites you can use are this: Socrative, a good way to check reading skills and abilities. Weebly, WordPress, Wix, these are website building softwares that again are very easy to use, drag and drop, lots of tutorials online, and you can build language production that students are doing and put them on there. WhatsApp, everyone's using it in the country we're presenting from, and many teachers have threads with their students. They're constantly, perhaps too much, they're 24/7 language support for students, but they're getting students to produce, they're getting them to read. It's all in English. It can be audio, it can be writing. And Flipgrid, again, I showed that earlier, but it is something that could be used in language production, certainly in a video format. So like I say, these are all on the website. Go back, see which ones you would like. You can find more, of course. This is just scratching the surface, but look into them. Go to YouTube and see which ones you're interested in and how you could use them. They're all free. There's a paid element for certain ones of them, but you can use these to enhance your learning and your lesson plans. Moving on to the next section, we're going to look at common teaching methodology in language teaching. So the different stages, there's obviously many, but you know, language teaching has gone through many changes. The main stages we tend to have are presentation, practice, production, PPP, communicative language teaching, and task-based learning. PPP, you present, you practice, you produce the language. Communicative language teaching, you expose them to the language, you look at the different functions within grammar and variety and merge them together. Task-based learning, you set them a real-life task, booking a table at a restaurant. You give them a task cycle and you focus on the language afterwards that they would have needed to produce that language, and maybe you repeat the task. So these are all common ways we would deliver a lesson. Online lessons wouldn't be any different. But I'm going to introduce something called Engage, Study, Activate. This has been pioneered by Jeremy Harmer and his book How to Teach English 12 years ago. Engage, Study, Activate combines the three elements of these teaching methodologies. It's an eclectic approach. It suits different learning objectives that we talked about in the last section and learning styles. Your online learning needs to be flexible. We're finding this out quite frequently, that there's so many things that can happen in online learning. There's different interactions with students. You need to be flexible. The activities need to be efficient, they need to be effective, and maybe using the flipped classroom that we talked about before could reduce the time and increase learner autonomy. So roughly, The engage section, this is games, discussions, stories, setting the context, focusing on the language, getting the students to predict things about the language and activating the knowledge they have. Study, you would continue looking at the construction of the language, look at the language in different contexts, make sure you bring in spelling and pronunciation, and set up some activities to discover. You can see how this is fitting like we have in PPP and communicative language teaching. And activate, use the language freely and as communicatively as possible. This is like task-based learning. You need to perform a task, you need to personalize it, make it relevant to the students. All the online learning tools I talked about before would engage with this. The thing about engage, study, activate is the standard sequence would be similar to PPP. You engage, you study, activate. But like I said before, we need to be flexible with online learning. You can try different teaching sequences. You could begin with an engage, go to activate, then back to study. You know, if it was a task, you could set up a game to start the task, give them the task, go back and study, so that they realize what mistakes they made when they put it. Some of them may have done it right and they'll feel confident. Study, you could put study first, set it them at home. This is the flipped classroom. Then do engage and then activate. And then of course, there's so many different ways. If you had multiple learning objectives like you would have in communicative language teaching, you would go engage to activate, back to study, then back to engage, then back to activate, and you could go around. So really think about your lesson plans. As I talked about in the last section, setting micro learning objectives is important in online learning, changing the activity, not just talking at them for 20 to 30 minutes. Think about how much they're paying attention and set the activities for them. What do you want to achieve? What can be done independently, and how can you maintain engagement in the class? Okay, this information again is on the website. So let's just recap the last two sections that I've delivered. If you were going to plan a lesson now, and we'll cover this again tomorrow, but think of your learning objective, the ABCDs. Think of your sub-objectives. What can all students, most students, and some students achieve? Think of your lesson stages. Is it just going to be normal PPP, or are you going to try the ESA approach and change it around a little bit? Think of your content. Think of all the tools that we've just discussed, and the variety, and make sure that you put some effort into the preparation here. If you make a good tool once, it can be used again, it can be adapted, it can be shared with colleagues, so it takes a little time to get used to them, but the more you do, the better and the quicker and the more efficient you'll be at the staging. And then finally, deliver. Deliver the lesson, but reflect on it. The one great thing about online lessons is you can record them quite easily and watch them back later and make changes to it. It's a great tool. You would love to have someone constantly critiquing you, and if it's yourself, then that would help. Okay, and to finish, just before we go into the Q&A section, I would like to share with you our website. We've used a Weebly. It's a free website building software that is very easy to use. Most of it's intuitive stuff, and here is the website that we'll share in the chat box. Okay, thank you.